The Icebound Enigma, Flight A-17's Final Secret. The Alaskan wilderness had long been a graveyard of lost souls, swallowed by ice and time. For 40 years, Flight AE-17 had been one such ghost, a passenger plane that vanished without a trace on Christmas Eve, 1976. No distress signal, no wreckage, only whispers of what might have happened. But now, a satellite anomaly had reignited the mystery, revealing what appeared to be the outline of an aircraft entombed in the frozen wilderness. Before we get into the story, comment number 1 to let us know you're following. If you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. For Dr. William Carter, a veteran glaciologist at 61, this discovery was unlike anything he had ever encountered. Decades of research in the Arctic's icy tombs had taught him one truth: nature does not give up its secrets easily. And as he examined the satellite images, something unsettled him, not just the discovery itself, but the strange tracks surrounding it, marking a path where no human had ever set foot. The expedition begins. Within days, a massive recovery mission was underway. The National Science Foundation and U.S. Air Force approved specialized equipment, including thermal drills, ground-penetrating radar, and survival pods to withstand the 40°C temperatures. Among the assembled experts was Dr. Eleanor Brooks, a renowned Arctic biologist whose expertise in predator behavior had proven invaluable in past missions. Her first impression of the site was unsettling. "This ice isn't normal," Eleanor muttered, running her gloved fingers over the uneven terrain. "It's fractured, but not from glacial movement. Something or someone was here before us." Carter exchanged a glance with Tom Harrison, their veteran ice pilot. His years of flying rescue missions had taught him to trust his instincts. And right now, something felt wrong. Unveiling the ghost of Flight AE-17. By the third day, the wreckage began to emerge from its frozen grave. The plane's fuselage had buckled under the weight of ice, its once sleek exterior now a twisted relic of history. The radar scans confirmed what they had feared: the entire crew and passengers were still inside, preserved in an eerie state of suspension. Carter's breath caught in his throat as he stepped inside the wreckage. The interior was pristine, untouched by time. Seats were still upright, luggage remained in compartments, and meal trays rested where they had been abandoned. It was as if the plane had been frozen in a single moment, the passengers trapped in time. Then came the most chilling discovery. The cockpit door had been forced open from the inside. Claw marks deep, jagged, scarred the metal, as if something had tried to escape. Reynolds, a forensic investigator, managed to recover the black box recorder, miraculously intact beneath the ice. As the distorted voice of the pilot crackled to life, the entire team huddled in silence, listening to the final moments of Flight A-17. "We are off course. Something is outside. It's not human. I repeat, it's not." A high-pitched screech filled the recording, followed by the sounds of chaos, the pilot shouting orders, passengers screaming, and then silence. Harrison exhaled, his fingers tightening around his radio. This wasn't just a crash. Carter ran a hand through his graying hair, his heartbeat pounding in his ears. They had expected to find wreckage, to bring closure. Instead, they had uncovered something far more disturbing. That night, the howls began. Low, guttural, echoing through the frozen air. Eleanor stepped out of her tent, scanning the horizon with her binoculars. Her blood ran cold. A circle of glowing eyes stared back. The wolves, or whatever they were, had returned. They were larger than normal, their movements too calculated, too unnatural. They weren't hunting, they were waiting. Then, without warning, one stepped forward. Its massive form moved with eerie precision, its breath visible in the cold air. It did not snarl. It did not charge. It simply stood, watching them, as if it knew why they were here. Eleanor felt a chill deeper than the cold. "They've been here all along," she whispered. "Since the night this plane fell from the sky." By daybreak, the decision was made. The wreckage would remain untouched, sealed beneath the Arctic's endless frost. Some mysteries were never meant to be solved. As Carter and his team packed up, he turned one last time to the circle of wolves, still lingering near the wreckage. They were never hunting, Eleanor murmured. They were guarding something. Carter nodded slowly. Or someone. As their helicopter ascended, he caught one final glimpse of Flight A-17, disappearing once more into the white abyss. The world would never know the full truth, and perhaps that was for the best. The forgotten flight, a frozen mystery unraveled. Dr. William Carter stood at the edge of the excavation site, his breath forming delicate clouds in the freezing Arctic air. The wind howled across the ice field, whispering through the remnants of Flight A-17, a plane that had vanished on Christmas Eve, 1976. It had been a ghost story, a legend whispered among aviation experts and Arctic explorers for decades. Until now. The logbook entries had painted a picture of survivors trapped in the cold, clinging to life in the wreckage. But what haunted Carter and his team more than anything else were the tracks, the ones circling the crash site for over 40 years, as if something had been watching, waiting. But for what? The mother bobcat and her two cubs had been an unexpected presence from the start. They had remained at the perimeter of the excavation site, never approaching, never fleeing. But there was something unnatural about the way they moved with precision, as if mapping a pattern no human could understand. Dr. Eleanor Brooks, a wildlife biologist accompanying the team, had studied Arctic predators for most of her career. Yet, this behavior defied everything she knew. "They're avoiding something," she murmured, adjusting her binoculars. Carter nodded, his gaze fixed on the larger bobcat. "They're following the same paths over and over," he said, his voice low, "like they're tracking something beneath the ice." Eleanor hesitated, "or guarding it." The words sent a shiver down Carter's spine, though he told himself it was the Arctic cold. Deep inside the fuselage, the logbook and flight attendant's diary had revealed an even darker truth. Some had survived the initial crash, lasting nearly 3 weeks in the merciless Arctic wasteland. But they were never alone. Carter scanned the final diary entries again, his fingers tightening on the frozen pages. January 5th, 1977, only 12 left. Julie didn't wake up this morning. The strange thing is, we found fresh kills near the wreck. Something left them there, watching over us. He swallowed hard. They weren't being hunted, he muttered. They were being protected. Reynolds, the expedition security officer, stiffened. By what? No one answered. The ground-penetrating radar had picked up something else, buried deeper beneath the wreck. It wasn't part of the plane. It wasn't natural. With delicate precision, the team drilled into the ice layers, revealing an object wrapped in metal plating. Carter's breath hitched as he brushed away the frost, revealing etched symbols unlike anything they had ever seen. Eleanor's eyes widened. This isn't modern. What the hell is it? Reynolds demanded. Carter stared at the intricate carvings, his gut telling him something was deeply wrong. The markings weren't from any known language, they were far older. The Nazis weren't the first ones to search the Arctic. Maybe they found something they weren't supposed to. The bobcats at the edge of the wreck suddenly stiffened, their golden eyes locked on the ice beneath them. Then, as if responding to an unheard signal, they turned and vanished into the storm, their presence lingering like a warning left unspoken. Hours later, as the research team packed up their findings, Carter made the final call. Seal it. The wreckage would remain in its icy tomb, undisturbed. Some mysteries weren't meant to be solved. As the last of the equipment was loaded onto the convoy, Carter turned one final time to where the bobcats had stood. They had been guides, watchers, maybe even guardians. And whatever their purpose, it wasn't just about protecting the dead. It was about protecting the living from what lay beneath. And as the Arctic winds howled, the ice slowly reclaimed its secret one that no human should ever disturb again. The Arctic's guardians, the forgotten flight's final secret. Dr. William Carter stood at the edge of the research station, his breath curling in the freezing air. 5 years had passed since the discovery of Flight A-17, and yet the site remained alive in ways no one had expected. The Arctic wind howled across the endless expanse of ice, but Carter wasn't listening to the wind. He was listening to them, the silent watchers who had been there since the beginning. The bobcats. The mother bobcat, now graying around her muzzle, prowled along the same frozen paths her ancestors had walked for over 40 years. Her movements were measured, deliberate, as if she were following a script only she understood. Carter turned to Dr. Eleanor Brooks, who sat beside him, watching through her binoculars. She had dedicated her career to these animals, these guardians. "She's still bringing food," Eleanor murmured. Carter nodded. The offerings never stopped. Even after the recovery operation had ended, after the remains of the passengers were returned home, after the world had moved on, the bobcats hadn't left. They still delivered small game to the wreckage site, still avoided the dangerous sections of ice, still watched over something only they understood. "What are they protecting?" Carter asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Eleanor exhaled. "Maybe it's not about protecting. Maybe it's about remembering." Carter turned his gaze back to the memorial, a black stone marker, now partially buried in the ice, inscribed with the names of those lost in 1976. A name no one knew had been added: the Arctic's Guardians. Just days before the 5th anniversary of the wreck's discovery, the research station received an alert. Ground-penetrating radar had picked up something beneath the ice. At first, the team assumed it was old equipment, remnants of the wreckage still buried deeper than they could reach before. But as the scans became clearer, it wasn't debris at all. It was a body. Carter's heart pounded as he and Eleanor led the excavation. The ice was thin here, softer than it should have been for an area untouched by human hands. As they carefully removed layers of frost, the first thing they saw was fabric-thick, aged clothing frozen stiff. Then a face. Time had preserved it almost too well. The features were peaceful, calm, undisturbed. The last survivor of Flight S-17. His body had never been found, not in the fuselage, not in the wreckage. He had walked away from the plane, had lived longer than the others, but he hadn't made it out. But what stunned the team wasn't the body itself. It was what lay beside him, a small, frozen carcass of a bobcat cub nestled against his chest. Carter stepped back, his breath hitching. The diary. "The mother bobcat stayed with me for hours today. She understands. I'm not afraid anymore." The descendants of that bobcat were still here, still following the same ancestral patterns, still honoring something far older than human history. The last survivor had never died alone. As the team carefully documented their final discovery, Carter felt something shift inside him. For decades, humans had looked at this crash site as a tragedy, a forgotten wreck, a mystery to be solved. But to the bobcats, it had never been forgotten. To them, it had become sacred ground. Carter turned to Eleanor. "We should leave it," he said. Eleanor met his gaze and nodded. "Yes," she agreed softly. "We should." And so, for the first time in 5 years, the research team packed up for good. The Arctic had given up its secrets, and now it was time to let them rest. Dr. William Carter stood at the edge of the crash site, the frozen remnants of Flight AE-17 gleaming under the fading light of the Arctic sun. The ice stretched endlessly around him, its quiet vastness carrying the weight of the past. He had spent years unraveling mysteries buried beneath the ice, but nothing had ever shaken him like this discovery. The bobcats were still here. 5 years had passed since the wreckage was uncovered, yet the animals remained, pacing their ancient paths, following the same invisible lines their ancestors had for generations. The same watchful eyes that had guarded the last survivors of AE-17 now met his gaze from the snowy ridge. Carter inhaled deeply, the air crisp and sharp in his lungs. Beside him, Dr. Eleanor Brooks was silent, her breath curling in the cold as she watched the mother bobcat and her nearly grown cubs move through the ice field. "You ever wonder why they never left?" Carter asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Eleanor's fingers tightened around the worn leather-bound diary recovered from the wreck. The last survivor's words were still etched into her mind. "I understand now why they've stayed close. They're the guardians of this place. They know what it means to survive here, to lose family here." She exhaled, closing the diary. I think she hesitated, then continued. "I think they remember." Carter turned to her, eyes narrowing. "You're talking about inherited memory." Eleanor nodded. It's not unheard of in some species instincts passed down through generations, but this is something different. She gestured toward the bobcats. They don't just survive here. They behave as though they understand, as if they know what this place means. As the research continued, Carter's team uncovered one final mystery, a set of preserved footprints leading away from the crash site, belonging to the last recorded survivor. They never found his body, Eleanor murmured. The tracks, once frozen solid, revealed a story unlike any other. The lone survivor, starving and weakened, had left the safety of the plane, but not alone. Beside his footprints were the unmistakable tracks of a bobcat. Carter's stomach twisted. The last survivor hadn't been abandoned. The mother bobcat had stayed with him, just as her descendants continued to watch over the site today. A profound silence settled between them. For decades, humans had searched for explanations, but the truth had always been here, hidden in the snow. It was never just about the wreckage. It was about the bonds that had formed in the aftermath, bonds that had never broken. A story passed through generations. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Carter and Eleanor watched the mother bobcat nudge one of her cubs forward, encouraging it to follow the ancestral path. It was the same path her ancestors had walked, the same path that had guided a dying man through his final moments, the same path that had led them here today. "Do you think they'll always stay?" Carter asked. Eleanor smiled softly. "I think as long as this place remembers, so will they." And with that, they turned, leaving the watchers to their eternal vigil, knowing that some mysteries weren't meant to be solved, only honored. Lessons from the Guardians of Flight A-17, the power of memory, compassion, and connection. The story of Flight AE-17 and the bobcats who watched over it for generations is more than just an incredible discovery. It is a profound reminder of the power of memory, compassion, and connection in our own lives. It speaks to the unseen bonds that link us, not only to those who came before us, but also to the world around us in ways we may not fully understand. In today's fast-paced world, where we are constantly driven by progress and technology, we often forget the importance of history and remembrance. The way the bobcats instinctively continued their silent vigil over the crash site is a testament to how deeply ingrained memory can be, not just in individuals, but across generations. Similarly, in our own lives, we carry the legacies of those who came before us, whether through family traditions, cultural heritage, or personal experiences that shape who we are. The story also highlights the power of compassion in unexpected places. The last survivor of Flight AE-17 found comfort in the presence of a wild creature, something many would have feared. Yet, in that moment, the bobcat was not a predator, but a guardian. In our lives, we often underestimate the impact of kindness, especially in difficult times. A simple act, whether it's lending a hand, offering a kind word, or simply being present, can mean the world to someone in need. Just as the bobcat did not abandon the survivor, we too have the capacity to stand by others in their darkest moments. Moreover, the idea of intergenerational learning is something we see in both nature and human society. The bobcats passed down an unspoken duty to watch over the crash site, just as we pass down knowledge, values, and wisdom through families, education, and communities. What we teach the next generation shapes the future. If we instill lessons of empathy, responsibility, and respect, whether for history, the environment, or one another, we create a legacy that extends far beyond our own lifetimes. Finally, the story reminds us that some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, only honored. In a world where we constantly seek answers, sometimes we must learn to simply appreciate the unknown. There are forces greater than us, whether it's nature, fate, or something else entirely, that shape the world in ways we cannot control. But rather than fearing the unknown, we can choose to respect it, learn from it, and find meaning in it. The bobcats of Flight AE-17 did not stay for recognition or reward. They stayed because it was part of something bigger than themselves. In the same way, we can choose to be guardians of what matters most, whether it's the memories of loved ones, the lessons of history, or the simple yet profound act of caring for others. Because in the end, what we leave behind is not just what we've built, but the connections we've forged and the lives we've touched along the way. If this story touched your heart, let me know in the comments below. Like, share, and subscribe for more tales that inspire and move us. Thank you for being part of this journey. See you in the next story.